Welcome to the Harmony Hill Legacy Podcast, Episode 7. My name's Todd Core. I am the soon-to-be lead pastor here at Harmony Hill Baptist Church. Joining me is the senior pastor and soon-to-be pastor emeritus of Harmony Hill. For the last 50 years, been the leader, Pastor John Green. Thank you so much for being with me again, Pastor John.
You're welcome, Todd. I'm looking forward to it. It's been a great time for us just to sit and talk about the past and just the things that God has done. So I'm looking forward to today.
Well, thank you. Today, I thought we would talk about the journey that you've led our church to the plurality of leadership. That's been a journey. I know we've talked about that, and I've actually gotten to be part of sort of the tail end of that process. So let's start at the beginning, though. And would you just sort of describe, when you first came here in 1972, you were the only staff pastor, at least full-time, I would assume. Maybe there was a music minister or something like that. Yeah. But everything vortexed to you.
Yes.
And so sort of walk us through that process of what that is like, and then what it looked like to start adding other staff members.
Okay. Yeah, it's a great question. I look back and I think probably every man of God will, with regards to when they first get started, you look back and you see the hand of God involved in your life, leading you and guiding you, to what He wants for you. I remember Catherine and I, my wife and I, had just gotten married in May, and so the plan had always been that we'd get married and then we would come out here to Texas, and I was going to go to the Baptist Missionary Association Theological Seminary, which is in Jacksonville, still there, still operational, fully accredited school in association with the same accrediting institution that Southwestern and other Southern Baptist seminaries are, although it is a Baptist missionary seminary. And so the plan was to come there, and I was going to do my studies, and I had my bachelor's degree, so I was working toward a Master of Divinity degree, and so we came out, and like I said, I was such a blank page. There was I really didn't have anybody guiding me or speaking into me other than what we call them Association of Baptist Students, or BSM in the Southern Baptist work. Director poured into me. He was a graduate from the seminary, and just a dear brother. And so, he poured some things into me. And so I came out and I started school. And so it was early on that, and I look back, and of course this was all part of God's plan, everything falling into place. And so it's like you see things happening in like Joseph's life and Moses' life and all the others, how God sovereignly and almost indiscriminately is moving chess pieces and everything. So God was doing that with us, and so I was only like 2 months into schooling, and I already had this itch that I want to be preaching somewhere every Sunday. That's what I want to do. And I knew I was supposed to be a pastor. I just knew that. And so I had that desire. So, I would take preaching appointments, to go, and Catherine and I would go do that on Sundays. And so I had that desire. And so then we got contacted by a friend that had come to school with us from back in Arkansas. And he was already being looked at by a couple of other churches, but Harmony Hill needed somebody to come and fill in. And because the pastor that was here at that time was going to go preach at another church in view of a call, and so they needed somebody to fill in here. And so he couldn't do it because he already had obligations, and so he gave them my name. And so through a turn of events, they came to me. And so Catherine and I came down, and I filled in. And so that pastor comes back, and he says, he's resigning, and he's going to go to this church in Alabama. And So then the church turns around and they asked me, would I be willing to come and preach in view of a call of being pastor? And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. I mean, that's what I was wanting to do. This to be a place for me to, to preach. And so that's what I did. And then, on that, the church then came back and asked me to be the pastor. They voted for me. And so I came back the Sunday before Thanksgiving of 1972, and I accepted the call of Harmony Hill to be the pastor. And so that got me started. Um, and so when Catherine and I moved into the parsonage in December, um, I I would go over every day to the church, and because my thing was, I had to make my way. What am I going to do?
Mm.
What's my day going to look like? Because there was no manual for this, you know. And I wasn't being taught this in seminary. I hadn't been there long enough, and so I just look back and I just see the sovereignty of God, just God's grace working so much in me, and so, I was pastor, I was secretary. The church didn't even have bulletins, so I started that, and I thought, we need to have a newsletter, um, and I need to be able to communicate with them. I need to be able to encourage them, and so I started a newspaper. It's called the Harmony Hill Herald, uh, and I had this little guy up in the corner, and he was like throwing the papers, and so that was my deal. And I ran that thing every week, the Harmony Hill Herald, and I did that for years.
Am I correct in my understanding of hearing this that when you say that, like it means you were in a corner or at your desk on a typewriter typing up the newsletter?
Yes, sir. Yes, I
Just
had.
wanted people to understand
Yeah,
what
yeah.
we're talking about.
Yeah, we're talking, and I don't even know what that was called. It was a long piece of paper, and it had like this green film that was on it, and you wrote it into my Olivetti editor, and that was a typewriter that
Okay,
probably no longer
fair enough.
exists. And then I would type that out, and then I would put in. I don't even know where I did that, but I found little cartoon things and stuff. And I mean, I dressed it up. It was attractional, and I got me a mailing list, and started mailing that out, and so it was just this thing working inside of me that being small was not acceptable. Um, and I had a lot to overcome because the church did not have a good name. She'd gone through some hard times, um, and uh, and so and I think I've told people before, but for those who may not know, I went an entire year. We had no guests, nobody visited the church, I had nobody walk the aisle, and so for 52 Sundays, because I didn't have anybody that could fill in. I mean, I was it. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and I preached, and I'd implore people to come, make decisions for Christ. Nobody came, nobody joined. We had no guests, and little did I know, I found out like 10 years later, 12 years later, one of the people who came and joined our church, somebody came in our conversation, and they were just talking about Harmony Hill, and they said, said years ago, said Harmony Hill was the joke of Lufkin's, because people would say there's anything but harmony on that hill.
Mm.
And so I had that. But that was part of our past. And so my whole focus was about growing.
Mm.
That I was going to encourage these people that God had a plan. I knew that God had called me. I knew that I was supposed to be in Texas. I believed in all my heart that I was supposed to be at Harmony Hill. And I've told you before. I told the guys on staff that there was a dear pastor was here, and we had a associational meeting here at our church up on the hill, and he came to me afterwards, and I don't know if I had preached that particular association or what, but his word to me was, he said, John, he said, you stay faithful, and he said, maybe someday God will let you pastor my church. And I knew he meant that as an encouragement, but it was just like a rod went up my spine, and I thought, why would I want to come to your church? God's going to do a great work here on the hill. And Todd, I could not, I was gripped by
Mm.
that. That is what it it would not let go of me. And I just believe it was the Lord that that God had said, and I've told you guys on staff that repeatedly that the word of God to me was, if you stay, I'll bless you. There's something I want to do here, but you just got to stick and stay. And so that was that was my desire. But everything did vortex into me, and I know you're wanting to talk about plurality of leadership, and so
Yeah, so what were some of the first positions or staff positions that first got incorporated as the church was growing, where you began to start expanding the leadership of the church?
yeah, well, that the first decade, uh, it was basically music and youth.
Mm,
In fact, that would have been all that it was. I had a man. He was the school tax assessor, Charles Turner, dear brother in Christ. Love him. He's gone to be with the Lord. His wife is in her mid-90s
mm,
now. He and Lucille, they were the ones who helped establish, and they set up the first nursery and children's ministry
mm,
here. And so they came from a much larger church, and they just poured their heart into Harmony Hill. They were one of the ones, they invested in us,
mhm.
invested in the next,
That's
as
right.
we talk about here on the Hill. And so just dear, dear friends. And so he handled Sunday school. He was my Sunday school superintendent. And I mean, they just did it. And they were some of the first ones that made us attractional to people.
Mm,
Uh, but that's all I had. I had myself. I did all the preaching, and then I had someone to lead music, and usually it was music and youth was a
mm,
combination, and that was part time until we got to 1978. Was when I hired a guy to do music and youth, and he was full time.
mm,
It took about 6 years.
mhm.
Um, because we built our first, we went into our first building program in 1975. After I'd been here 3 years, the growth started,
Mm.
and so we had to build. Uh, so, but that stayed that way, um, and then we went to then to some we split music and youth, and we had people who were given just to that.
Mm.
And that started us down the road of growth as well. But that would have been the next division that took place. Uh,
So, going just looking through the like the 100-year history book that we had, and especially as we were going over like the celebration for 50 for you and Miss Catherine here,
yeah,
I noticed that we did just slowly, maybe once a decade, another, an education minister or a children's person, and then support
discipleship.
staff and
Yeah,
discipleship and all of those things. But then somewhere along the way, and that's probably more recently, I would assume, um, you recognized, I guess, that even though there were other people taking large sections of leadership in ministry, everything was still at the top
yes,
vortexing to
yes.
you. And so, um, what was it? Was there a specific moment or just the Lord working in your heart that you began to go, okay, I need even in the top level of the organization a plurality.
I think, yeah, and again, there's this journey that was taking place. I think in denominations, some further down the road than others, um, and this whole idea of there being this senior pastor and everything just kind of vortexes up to that. I never in all of my reading and everything, um, I it just never was made clear to me. I felt like that because I'm called to lead this church, that the weight of leadership was to be borne on my shoulders.
Mm,
And and consequently, I mean, of course, the church, because she kept growing, the weight of responsibility at times was crushing.
Mm.
But I still felt like it was like, Jethro, coming to
Mm.
Moses, "This thing you're doing is not good. You're gonna wear yourself out and the people." I wish I'd had a Jethro
Mm.
to speak into me to say, "John, you're way past time. You've got these guys around you, and you're carrying the weight all yourself." And the thing was, I'll be the first to say I wasn't doing a good job. Um, and I think that there was a point at which I became the bottleneck for my own organization.
Mm.
The You talk about the leadership lid that every person's got their lid. In other words, you got this place that your capability stops here.
Mm.
Okay, so you've either got to go into a new learning mode and grow, or you've got to bring in others who fill in your gaps. And so I just didn't understand that.
Mm.
And I think back and I look back like today, having you guys in there with me in senior leadership. And for those of you that are listening in, we started about 3 years ago. I just realized I can't do this by myself. Um, and that I need a consistent group of guys that I will gather around me that I believe I've been led by the Lord to pull them in, and that they're gonna help me make leadership decisions. And, um, and so what I did, was I went to all of my senior staff men, my guys who lead in music, every pastor on staff. So I went to them. Actually, I had them come into my office, and I told them that, that had nothing to do with favoritism or anything else, but that I believed I needed to have some guys around me who would help me make decisions. And based upon how I felt led by the Lord, I was tapping out Todd, and Ben Stokes, who's now our associate pastor, and then our chief administrator, our executive administrator, who is Barry Bennett. And these guys were gonna meet with me on a week-to-week basis, and this was gonna be my leadership team. These are the guys that are gonna help carry the weight, and help me think through things. And I was gonna make myself vulnerable to them, and that they would be part of the decision making. This was not gonna be just, something that was just, "Oh, well, this looks cute, we've got this little deal," but that literally they could help change the direction of the church. And I think that you understood that, that I was saying, "I legitimately need you."
Absolutely.
It was a it was an absolute game changer for me, that I no longer felt the crushing weight, um, of leadership. Um, and honestly, for any pastors that may be listening, when uh, one person can really effectively shepherd maybe 100, maybe 150 people. But once you get beyond that, you're out of your ball game. That's too much. And so about every 100 to 150 people, you would be adding some staff to help you carry the weight, or raising up leaders in the church who are going to assume responsibility, whether paid or non-paid. And so, with us having 2,000 plus members here, I was way past due,
Mm.
having you guys here. And the thing about, having 4 of us, it's not that I saw the writing on the wall, but it was just y'all were the ones that I felt in my heart that if I stood before the Lord, I would say, "God, I believe these are the ones that you chose that are to come alongside of me."
Mm.
Having no idea at that point
Right.
of what God was gonna put in my heart about you,
Yeah.
you know? But I think that was a step
Mhm.
toward that.
Yeah, someone that's gonna be coming into that model, it's the plurality of leadership, both with that team that you're describing and sort of the elder team and the changes in the elder team even over the last 3 to 5 years,
Yeah.
of their sort of entering into that plurality of leading was probably one of the top pluses for me coming into, moving from student ministry into the leadership role, was recognizing, one, I'm not coming into a large organization to do this by myself. There
Yeah.
are others who will be joining arm in arm and helping carry a lot of that weight and some of the tasks. There have been many times over the last several years that, as happens in church life, we've had to make hard decisions,
Mm.
difficult decisions, and being able to go with another member of that elder team or that senior leadership team
To have that awkward meeting.
to have that
Yeah.
awkward meeting brings a level of confidence and accountability um, and just and protection
Yes.
even.
Yeah.
And so for me, that has been a huge part of why this is such an attractive place to come in and be a leader, is because there's a lot of people that their win is your win and your win is theirs, and that's a positive place to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, I am super grateful um, to God, just working, God working in spite of me. And
Mm,
there are times that you just get clear revelation about something, but then there are things that God just sovereignly leads you along, and you find yourself at a certain place, and it's just been God's been leading you, and you haven't even
mm,
realized it. And so I've thought when you mentioned this point. Yeah, I don't know that I can go back and say it was at this point that I
mm.
I had that kind of revelational deal. I just know that, that it came, and I realized, well, the first thing, and I would say this to my brothers, when you go back and you look at all the epistles, Paul is consistently talking about that he appointed elders in those churches, and
Mm,
so it was always plural. There was not just one elder, um, and so there was all. I think there was the biblical evidence. There was plurality of leadership.
mm,
And I think those guys would have done ministry together,
mm.
because the problems can be huge, and particularly as the congregation gets larger. One guy just can't do it. I mean, it's impossible. And that's
Mm.
what Jethro told Moses. He says, "You're going to die. This is
Right.
it's going to kill you." And I think we all feel that at sometimes. God, I'm going to die if something doesn't happen here. And to have a brother alongside of you who that God is working through, um, it's just the way to do ministry.
So there's obviously, and I believe, and I know you believe, that there's a lot of positives to a plurality of leadership, shared responsibility and
Yeah.
shared leadership. But going from when everything vortexes to one person to that does come at cost. And so maybe nothing comes to mind, but what have been some of the challenges of going from everything vortexes to one in the positive sense that you can make a decision and move forward versus now I'm going to do this in a group? What are some of the challenges or things that you had to wrestle with to get to the place of being able to share
Oh,
leadership?
I yeah, going back to that, I mean, there were those times that I know, and I can't be specific, but
Right.
I know I just pulled a trigger. I just kinda did it, and then I remember specifically with Ben, uh, that he would maybe come to me and he'd say, "Did you yada, yada, yada?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And, I didn't ask y'all about it, I just did it, and of course, it went against everything that we were seeking to establish, but it's like I had to break that that habit, it was such a part of me. I just pulled the trigger. Why? Because I gotta make the decision, and so I had to learn, you no longer have to do that.
Mm,
That's it's no longer that way, and it's better, um, and I wouldn't go back for anything.
mm.
You guys have been a jewel, and a gift from God, and, I just I wish so much when I've looked back through the decades, how that potentially would have changed, and I just have to trust the sovereignty of God, Todd, in that,
Mhm.
that's where you can bemoan too much and make yourself too much, that, I should have done that or whatever, but I just trust that when it was absolutely necessary that a decision be made, God communicated that to
Mm.
me, and, um, and so, I sleep at night with that.
There you go. Well, thank you for sharing your heart on the plurality of leadership. And I do believe that the church is in a postured for great things and a foundation for more growth because there are more leaders. Like you talked about that cap. When you have more leaders, the cap comes off and there's a foundation for
Oh,
more.
and and
Yeah.
let me just say that on top of that, just to those of you listening, I I do believe that has been a positive thing for our church with the fact of that when I tell them that it's time for me to step back and to step down, our church knows I'm not the only one.
Mm,
They know there are men who are already in leadership position. They know if something happened to me and I was taken out of the way all of a sudden, there are other guys that are there. And so uh, that's a positive thing. I think it has helped our church do the transitioning
mhm,
she's done and done it well that we've all been so grateful for, um, is because they would say, we have a plurality of leadership
mhm.
in our pastoral ministry. So there's a whole lot of benefits. And I think
Absolutely.
that's one of them.
Absolutely. And I appreciate your humility to let others into the leadership
Mm.
circle because that can become a cap is the
Yes, sir.
pride and the desire to want to be the only one that people are
Yeah.
coming to. And so I appreciate that. I would just say as we wrap up this episode that these principles, we've been talking about our church, but whether you're in business or leading a small group, the principle is the same. The more people you're leading with, the greater the opportunity for growth and the sharing of the burden. So I'd encourage you to just think about what applications that can look like in your own life.
Totally.
Thank you for being with us here on the Leadership Legacy. Well, I said leadership. That's what we've been talking about. The Legacy podcast here at Harmony Hill. And thank you for watching. And we hope you'll join us for our next episode. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, share, drop a review. Let people know about it so that we can grow the audience so that they can hear about what God's been doing in Pastor John and here on the Hill over the last 50 years. We'd also love to have you come and join us for in-person worship on the Hill.